This podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended to provide medical advice. It exists to entertain and inform. Alba.
You gotta listen, you don't have to read. For historians.
Welcome, everyone. This is For Historians, the podcast misadventuring into the archives of medical history and beyond. Each show, we dissect a history of medicine topic from the past to learn a little something about how medicine got to be the way that it is today. I'm Dr. Max, and I'm joined here by my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Aaron.
Hello.
And Dr. Mike. I'm going to take what I can get.
Yes.
Okay. As well as our medical history intern extraordinaire, Alba. Hello, Alba.
That's me. Hello.
See, normal. I like it every time. So when we signed on, you guys were arguing about Star Wars. What was the outcome on that?
Episode 8
4,
was
5,
the
and 6
greatest
are the
movie
only
ever
real
created.
trilogy. Wait, what?
Said episode 8 was the greatest movie ever made.
Boy, with that, we're going to go straight to our ad.
Hey, man.
Well, I'm sure you guys reached a veritable consensus while I was away, and I'm the only one wearing a Star Wars shirt right now. It's got a Wookiee on it. It says Milwaukee.
Oh,
Oh,
where
that's
did you
great.
get it? That is awesome. I want that shirt.
In Milwaukee, where I live. You just walk around and somebody will give you one. You just have to ask. Anywho, well, before we get to whatever we're going to be talking about today, I think we need to take a few minutes to talk about our sponsor, Artery Inc. Listener, wearing your heart on your sleeve is typically a metaphor, but you can make it a kind of reality. I mean, it's not your actual heart, but a way cooler and more artistic representation of your heart, or your other organs for that matter. What am I talking about? Artery Inc., an anatomy-inspired pro-healthcare worker, pro-everybody-else company right here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that has a lot of really cool clothing and apparel designs to fit whichever organ you feel like wearing on your outsides. To fully appreciate this, go over to www.arteryinc.com, spelled I-N-K, to check out their selection and fill up that cart before Christmas. Use the code HISTORYPOD to save 10% at checkout on orders over $35 and show your love for our show. Note that this does not apply to subscription boxes. And I'll get back to the show. Yep. All right. Well, we're back, and it is time for the Mike's Trivia segment. That is where you, the listener, send us a medical history trivia question, and we will throw it at Mike, see if he knows the answer without any preparation beforehand. And if he doesn't, the listener is awarded a medical eponym in honor of fooling Mike. But if he does know the answer, you get the opposite of whatever that would be. And it hasn't happened yet, so we haven't figured it out. So this week we have a question asker named Becky, and she listens with her father, I should say, but she's the one who sent me the question. So technically, Becky, this shout out is for you. In what year was the Swan-Ganz catheter invented?
Swan-Ganz. Swan-Ganz catheter.
Sounds like two friends.
I can give a little primer on what that
honest.
is. So
I
this
can
is
do it.
Okay,
I can do it.
Go for it. Okay. Sorry,
Jacob
my bad.
Swan and Lucy Gans. Best friends.
Swan's-Ganz.
Just one swan.
Swan-Ganz catheter. 1942.
Okay, what's the
Lucille
catheter do?
Swan. So the catheter, it's one of the more challenging lines to place. We all, like in residency, floated swans or tried to float swans.
It depends how old you were in residency,
Try's the
honestly.
operative word.
Have you done one, Aaron?
No. I've seen one
think I was
done. I don't know if I ever actually floated one.
It was kind
Maybe
of a way
once.
to
Maybe once.
monitor central pressures,
Meaning?
pulmonary arterial pressures.
Yeah, what?
So,
I'm lost. You floated a swan?
so
you,
yeah.
you
So,
put
yeah,
a
you
swan
take
in a
this
pond. and you-
catheter.
Yeah, this is what I'm picturing. A swan in a pond with a tube in its urethra.
No, Swan.
That's-
Lucille Swan. Lucille Swan and Seth Gans. And they were two competitors, actually, in 1942. So they were trying to figure out who could lacerate pulmonary arteries faster. And they came up with a fairly similar device. And it's been used to torture patients now for the past 50 years. We don't do it anymore. They might do it in CVICUs, but
Extremely rare, but yeah, they still.
so yeah,
there's
so it's
sometimes.
a way to measure like central. I think it's pulmonary arterial pressures. So you go into the IJ and you kind of go through the heart
Internal jugular vein.
Yeah, so in the neck.
into the right side of so right atrium, right ventricle, out the right ventricle, and then try to get it into the pulmonary arteries, and you wedge
the
it
lungs,
as
yep.
deep in the
So
lungs.
you
as can.
travel through the heart to
Mhm.
get
Yep,
to
through the right side of the heart.
that
Yep.
valve. You
Just to
go
get a
into the
squiggly
right
little
side
line.
to
Yeah.
get all the way.
Like, but you're like, so you
and
have
that's the catheter.
you have like a skinny plastic tube catheter in the neck, and then you're threading this like. It looks like when you try to, what's not the word? Yeah.
Snake a
Roto-rooter
drain?
stuff. Yeah. Like when you snake a
Yeah.
drain, it's like the same kind of thing. So, but it's very, of course, skinny and fragile. But so you're pushing that through this catheter in the neck and you're watching it go through the heart.
And
And
it's
you're
got a
trying to get
pressured transducer on it. So you're watching these pressures. And then when it hits the waveform that you want, and I can't remember what that is,
No.
that's when you know you're in the
Okay.
spot you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And why do you guys keep saying float?
Because you've got to like let it go through the.
Oh.
It's got a little balloon on it. It's got a little balloon.
That's right. It's got a little, you blow up a little balloon
Yeah.
on the end, and the balloon in the blood flow, like the blood
Yeah.
helps pull
Push
the
it along.
catheter.
You're basically hoping
into
that
the-
it floats through the circulation of the heart and then ends up in the pulmonary artery where, if you keep advancing it, you can wedge it into this. It's basically the end of the pulmonary artery to kind of block it off and be like, how high is this pressure right here? You don't want to leave it there. You want to pull it back, I believe. But so you can kind of, it lets you know a lot of things about pressures in the heart, et cetera. And this was like a big step forward in intensive care. And Mike, I should let you know that you were wrong. You were off by 20 plus years.
Which
But,
way though?
1968 is the answer.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, I thought 40s was reasonable, but
It wasn't a bad guess at it. But so the actual answer, 1968. Dr. Jeremy Swan, who is a cardiologist.
What you looking at, Swan?
Jeremy.
That's the Swan part. And then there was, he was working with a student researcher, Willie Gans, who eventually went on.
Willie
And
Gans.
it was William, but apparently he went by Willie. He went on to become a cardiologist later, but at this point he was a researcher, I believe. And they made the catheter, and I mean, basically the whole crux of it was they were trying to do this procedure before, but they were kind of the first to develop a catheter with a balloon, so you could float it, let the circulation carry it to where you wanted it. And Mike was kind of hinting at this a bit. This was something that was really popular for a time because it really did give a lot of information about what was going on in the heart. But as the years go by, finding that maybe the usefulness of it's very invasive, etc. So now we have a lot of non-invasive ways to kind of get this information. So it has really made this catheter fall out of use. I believe there is sometimes that they do still use it, but these are some pretty complicated cases, and I don't think that they would be. They're probably very rarely, if ever, used in an emergency department now, I would think. I had not.
Yeah, no.
I had not had to float a Swan. You guys were ahead of me in residency, so I was. Not,
and I was a little ahead of Aaron. Yeah, we saw a fair number.
That means, Becky, you do win an eponym. And so I will be honest with you, I was curious about something. So I went to ChatGPT because I said, I wonder if it could generate an eponym. And so, Becky, you're going to get the first ChatGPT generated eponym because I just wanted to see if it could do it. And it did. And it's kind of weird, but it technically did what I asked. So here we go. So you guys have probably heard of Beck's triad, right? That's a finding. When we say triad, it's three different kind of findings in a case. So Beck's triad is definitely a cardiovascular one, sort of where you get fluid outside the heart and like what happens with it. We won't get into that because we're here to talk about Becky's triad. That's your eponym, Becky. And so this was put together by our friend ChatGPT and was, again, kind of weird and kind of charming. So Becky's triad, this from the robot friend, is named for a renowned physician, Dr. Becky Bubbly. It identifies a laughing-based condition. Number one part of the triad is Becky's belly chuckles. This computer is very fascinated with alliteration, it appears. These are uncontrolled belly laughs at the most unexpected times, especially triggered by the sight of rubber chickens. But it's number two part of this is giggling goosebumps, which appear on the skin accompanied by a soft, melodious giggle. Sounds creepy to me. And it happens when exposed to medical jargon. The last part is jocular jaundice, which is my favorite that the computer came up with. And this is yellowing of the skin while laughing. Again, it's weird, but I kind of like it. So I wish I would have thought of that
Oh
one.
my God.
But
poor
here's the thing.
Becky.
Becky, here's the thing. If you have all three, you have Becky's triad. And although ChatGPT made an interesting triad, it didn't actually really say what the condition
It means.
identifies.
Oh,
So I'm going to say that that this diagnosis, these three findings, basically what they tell you is that this is the response that people named Becky have when listening to our show.
Aww.
They become jaundiced.
You redeemed yourself, Max.
I'm all laughing. Thank you.
I mean, that's
Thank you.
yeah. What point is a triad with? Yeah, ChatGPT failed. There's no point to a triad without
Mhm.
it
It
pointing
Gave
to
me
a
three
diagnosis.
things. It used alliteration.
Oh,
and
good
like, it was
job.
kinda
Triad
weird.
means
Yeah.
3. No, it's got to
Yeah.
point to a diagnosis.
The computer did that. Becky, you're welcome. I'm
And
sorry.
wait, did you type
Lauren's
in
mad.
giggling? Did you type in
No,
Becky
I
triad
asked. I said,
giggling?
can you come up with a humorous fake
Oh, that's where
eponym with the name Becky? And that's what it kicked out.
But you can like
It told me
adjust
4
it.
times that it's not a real eponym. And I was like, okay, thank you, ChatGPT. I get it.
Yeah, it's
Then-
very
But
concerned.
you could say like, take that, make it darker. Take that.
I did. I
Yeah.
said, can you try it again? And then it just started making up like weird acronyms. I was like, okay, well, it's just gonna go with
It just
first
was
one.
all giggling. Everything had to do with giggles. I wish I
thought it
could
was-
giggle.
I thought it was adorable. Anyway, there you have it.
It's a
So,
very cute triad. Yes. No, it's quite adorable. All right.
You're welcome, Becky. Thanks for listening, Mike. You're bringing the heat tonight, huh?
I am. Yeah, I feel bad for last week. That was post nights. Had a busy weekend. Couldn't really focus.
No heat.
But now I'm better. Now I got the heat. And it's going to be the best thing you've ever heard.
Nice.
Okay.
I'm going to set the stage. You are an intern at a local hospital in the Bronx, and you work in the emergency ward. We know they don't have an emergency room, but you're the intern on duty.
Hmm.
So your patient, Leonard, comes in. Oh, it's 1916.
Okay.
Oh,
So comes into the ER in the Bronx or whatever that is, a room full of coughing people. And he's
I was
got,
like, I know what the Bronx is. I get what you're saying.
yeah,
It's a borough.
So he's got a high fever,
Hmm.
sore throat, headache, and lethargy.
Cool. Admit.
COVID, go home.
No, 1916. But it could be influenza.
Okay. Do you want us to respond to this?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Do we
this
ask
is the
you
case.
questions or?
Yeah.
Headache, sore throat, what and what?
Fever, sore throat, headache, and lethargy. Yeah, he says that he feels tired, but he also appears lethargic.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, that does make, that always gets your attention, right? So people shouldn't be lethargic, especially because the ER is very stimulating, right? So like when people are kind of just completely out of it or sleepy or whatnot in an environment full of beeps and people poking at them and bright lights, it's never good.
I don't think they developed beeps in 1916, though. They didn't
That's
have
true.
beeping.
Okay.
Beep.
So, yeah.
So this is an
Maybe a bell
understimulating
ringing?
ER. Yeah, it's probably bell ringing. Ding, ding,
Or
ding.
moaning.
So
All
is,
right.
is Leonard making sense? Can we talk to Leonard? Hey, man, what's
So
going on?
like he wakes up fairly easily. He's lethargic, but when you ask him questions, he can converse with you normally. He still looks like he feels ill.
Sure.
Does he have any trouble breathing? Is his voice different than normal? Does it sound
Voice is the same, like no hot potato voice or anything like that. No like signs of upper airway
weird? He's not
involvement.
wheezing or
Nope.
like that? Nothing? Okay.
He's
Mhm.
breathing fast, but he's got clear lungs.
Does he have a headache?
Not terribly fast. He's got a headache.
Is it a bad headache? Is his
It's mild. He just doesn't feel good.
does his
Hmm.
neck
More
hurt
like
really
a
bad
diffuse
too?
ache. Maybe slightly, but
That's
he can
not
move
a
his
big
head
deal?
fine.
Okay.
Is there any congestion?
He's got some nasal congestion.
How long's he been sick?
Probably about 3 or 4 days.
Anybody else sick?
A bunch of people.
All of
Like
the Bronx.
New York City?
New York, I mean the world essentially.
The world. The world.
16. They're all sick.
How's his skin?
Skin is
Is it
normal.
like hot or anything? Does he maybe have a fever?
Yeah. So his temp is 101.5.
Oh, wait, you
so he
said he
feels
had
a
a
little
fever.
warm. Yeah, cheeks are a little flushed. Other than
Hmm.
that, like he's not like terribly hot.
Okay.
Like, not attractive or?
No, he's probably a 4.
Oh, wow. In
Yeah, he's a
1916,
hospital-
that's in
he's a hospital
1916, that's rough. Jeez. All right. Okay. So sick for a few days. All right. So I'd want to know his vital signs if they have any indication of that.
Yeah. So temps 101.5.
May I have his vital signs? Be
Yes,
nice.
you may. Heart rate is 112.
Oh no,
Respiratory
Fast.
rate is 22.
that's too
Little
fast,
fast.
too.
And pulse ox is like 96%.
1916 pulse ox.
You got a, yep. Mm-hmm.
They probably took out his blood and like threw it into the air, looked at the color.
They
and
did not
guessed.
draw any labs. No.
Okay.
No laps.
Your ER, whatever this room is full of people.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Well,
Did they do blood pressure then?
Oh, yeah. It was 120/60.
Okay.
that sounds like I didn't check and it was normal.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, all right. This is such a run of the mill case. Is it also winter? I mean, this would be like,
It's winter, yeah.
yeah, this is like,
You want
sometimes
to put your nickel down?
75% of what we see all the time. This could be any number of things. He says lots of people are sick. Have I been seeing a lot of people recently with the same type of stuff? Is my whole
Yes.
waiting room full of, yeah.
Full of them.
So you're going to, I'm going to think this is probably whatever everyone else has. So, and this is still the case now. I'd be like, oh, this sounds like flu. I'm going to not worry about this guy too badly. And, in a modern ER, we would probably triage him mid of the pack and doesn't need to come back right away, but could be sick. So we'll need some things when they get back into a room and and probably some sort of viral process.
I feel like Mike's gonna throw a curveball though.
Well,
Look me
I'm
in the eye,
wondering
Mike.
because he just said 1916 or 1917.
There's some big things happening around this time.
Yeah,
There
right.
were.
So, So
Were.
You guys ready to put your nickel down?
Mike really wants us to put nickels down.
This
I
was
have
going to
more
be our
questions.
shortest. You do? Okay.
I don't know if they're good questions. Or
no,
not.
yeah, go for it.
I don't know. Does he have GI symptoms? Is he pooping?
Oh,
Or
be
throwing
thorough.
up.
I
Yep.
get it.
Yeah, pooping, no tenderness.
He
He's
is
got
poop-
like a mild stomach ache. He feels
Is he
a little
good
nauseous.
pooping or bad pooping?
I just like regular poops. Like they're,
Regular pooping.
I would say like nutmeg brown color.
So it's not like
Um,
diarrhea.
He had 1916's Chipotle the other day, and so there's some corn remnants. Other than that, it's normal. He brought in a sample
okay.
because back then it was like going to the vet. You had to bring your poop in.
This is an interesting thing. Do you have other questions? Because
No, just if it was like
No,
throwing up. You
yeah.
said no throwing up, nothing.
you asked
So
about the
it's
skin.
just the
That's
things
that's
you
a
named.
great question as well, right? If he doesn't have a rash.
It doesn't
think-
seem like neurologically he's out of it. It sounds like he's sick. He
He's-
feels sick.
He's with it.
He's
just real
sleepy, but he
tired.
wakes up very easily. You don't even have to,
Yeah.
stimulate him in any other way other than say, "Hey, Leonard, you feeling all right?"
His
Leonard's
reflexes
like,
okay?
"No, I don't feel
Yep.
good."
This is polio days. You might as well check some reflexes. Why
Yeah,
not?
reflexes are good.
Okay.
Is he eating?
All right, it's
eating?
diagnosis time.
Okay.
My question.
I'm just gonna keep asking.
No, this is
No.
funny though,
No,
because
I'm
like
good.
they've done studies on average, ER doctors especially, we let people talk for on average around 6 or 7 seconds before we interrupt them. So like you have a very brief window.
No, we don't.
You have a very short window to tell your story, and then we interrupt and we get to the point. And then, I would say on average, like he told me the chief complaint, and I already lost interest. So I was like, you got the flu or strep or something. If you're not dying, then you're going to get in line. So
Was that final answer?
I'm going to say my nickel is on influenza. That's where I
I was
am.
gonna say statistically, I'll say influenza, but I'm suspicious of Mike throwing a curveball because
Yeah, 'cause
he's dodgy like that.
Influenza is so
Alba?
obvious.
I think he's got pink eye. I don't know.
Okay. Oh, we didn't ask
All
about
right,
his
so,
eyes. Does he have discharge?
They are slightly red, a little injected, so a little red, no discharge. All right, 2/3 of you guys were right. He has influenza. What's your disposition for this guy?
Disposition?
Yep,
Okay, so
1916 disposition.
1916 disposition.
1960 disposition is go home.
Go home and drink yourself to sleep.
I would want
Go
more
home.
information. So how old is Leonard?
Leonard is in his 20s.
In his 20s? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. So 20-year-olds would be able to tolerate a heart rate in the 120s for a while. That's probably from the fever. if he doesn't have significant signs, and he doesn't need oxygen and he doesn't need
He has
fluids
no
for
chest
blood
pain.
pressure.
Mhm.
He otherwise looks okay. I would be like,
He's
this is
fine, Aaron. Just
you
let
need
it
to go
go.
home.
I was about
Go
to say
home.
the
Go
ER
home.
like we're getting a story
home.
and his ER docs were just so on edge. We're like, okay, there's going to be some crazy complication, but
Yeah, I'm writing my
20-year-old
note now. Welcome
a
to
little
my
sick.
note.
Why are
I do
you
not see
here?
any evidence of organ failure.
So no, I think overwhelmingly this
Go
guy,
home.
like everybody else in that waiting room,
Go home.
is a bit sick. It's like you think you have flu, but it's 1916, and
Take some laudanum.
we haven't developed Tamiflu yet, which is just going to give you diarrhea in the future anyway, and probably doesn't
Mhm.
work. But go ahead and
Don't get me
go
started
home,
on
and
Tamiflu.
you'll probably be fine, or maybe you won't. We'll find out, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Come back
So
if you feel worse.
I think that's a fantastic plan with this guy.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. I did it better than Aaron.
Yeah. So that's it. Is it interesting?
No,
I feel like you're going to make
not
it
yet.
I would
interesting.
do a short and sweet one. So
All right,
yeah,
well, have a good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody. This is why you
guys
get
are
sent home so quickly after you see the
amazing
doctor.
clinicians. So 4 years goes by. You finished your training.
Whoa!
You're now working as an attending at the same hospital in the Bronx.
And Leonard comes back.
And Leonard comes back. You recognize him because you got a great memory for faces. And you're like, I know this guy. I've seen him before. And in the midst of a influenza pandemic,
You check the electronic chart and you see that
you remember. Yeah. He's like,
yeah.
hey, I saw you, Doc. And you're like, yeah, I totally remember. Yep.
Yep, sure. All right. Yeah,
So,
you were the guy.
So Leonard comes back. Didn't seem to be sick at all, just kind of going about his day. And he had this sudden onset of extreme lethargy and was also a little bit rigid, had a hard time moving, had this recurrent headache. Now his neck is a little stiffer. All of his joints felt rigid too. So he came back to the hospital because he just doesn't know why he's feeling sick.
I hate this case.
Kind of at the tail end of our pandemic, things have kind of normalized. Everybody's like going and socializing. The world's not shut down anymore. Now he just feels kind of like garbage.
So okay. So did he say he just didn't feel like himself? Because that is the hardest thing for me to know what to do with.
Well, see, the nice thing is
You
you
said
know
a
what
little
himself is
rigid.
like. So
Yeah,
Oh, there you
he's
go.
not like himself.
Can't even escape.
So
with
he's
that
got
one.
he feels a little stiff. You said
mhm.
okay,
Yeah,
And he's
very stiff,
very
Mhm.
lethargic.
very lethargic.
Okay,
Mm.
so
Like to the point where he's falling asleep while you're doing
mm,
your questioning.
that's bad.
And you said stiff, like, is he self-described as stiff, or is he stiff if you try to like examine his joints and stuff?
He says that he's stiff, and he's also stiff on exam.
And is neck supple? Like it moves around, doesn't hurt him, or are we
It does,
worried
but
that
it's really slow to move.
Okay, is it all the joints?
It's mostly upper extremities compared to lower. It's all, but upper is worse than lower.
Upper's worse
Interesting.
than lower.
And lungs and all that clear. Like he's not really having flu-y symptoms here. Right,
It's
to be
weird
clear?
because no flu. Oh, I
Okay,
mean, he's
got
got
it, yeah.
headache. He does not have a fever now.
He does have a headache though.
Yep, and he seems like disturbingly calm. Like nothing seems to be bothering him, but he's there, so something clearly bothers him.
Can you feel if you touch all the legs and everything, and get
Yep.
out feathers and tickle stuff? It's like
Yep, everything
tickles.
tickles.
If you tap on some
He-
reflexes.
They are, I would say, a little bit slow. But you can't tell if they're slow because his legs and I guess his arms too are so stiff.
Okay, so maybe abnormal. No, a little bit.
Mhm.
How are his vital signs? Did we get vital signs this time around?
Yep, 98.6 for a temp,
So
80 for a heart rate,
normal.
16 for a respiratory rate.
Normal.
Normal, or
Pulse
they didn't
ox
check.
is 99%. If I said 20, it would be they didn't check. And then blood pressure is 134/69.
Nice.
Get to his
Nice.
primary
I
to
appreciate that.
get
That's all
screened
normal.
for hypertension. Yeah, that too. Okay, so none of that's super exciting. It's all fairly reasonable.
All right. Is he having trouble breathing?
No, he's there with a friend too.
Oh.
Hi, friend.
Hi,
What's the
friend.
friend's name?
Peter. P-I-T-O-R.
Why did you say it so weird?
He's just worried we're going to call
pronounce
the La Migra on him.
Peter,
or-
what's going on, man? Why'd you bring him in?
He was having really weird like vocal tics at home, and then he started cutting himself.
What?
He also had been using a disturbing amount of puns.
What?
What's happening?
Like,
Yeah, ridiculous, like nonstop. You're like, Leonard, these aren't funny anymore. And he would wake up, say a pun, go back to sleep.
Does he want to be on a podcast? He could be part of the show with that.
Yeah. So anytime he woke up, he was really manic. He like had these exaggerated movements, and then when he was still, you couldn't get a response out of him.
okay. So Leonard, who do you have with you? This is Peter.
Peter.
Yeah.
Peter.
What's their relationship?
They're friends, good friends. They've known each other since enlisting in the Army. I don't know.
Good friends.
All right.
Okay. Okay. All right. And it's 1920 now, right?
A couple years later.
Is there a military history? Or are you making that, or is that a sidebar?
It's not really important in this. I mean, it is.
Okay.
But it's not. It's just a way to
Because
explain
if
the
he
1920
goes somewhere, if he gets deployed, right?
Right. So
right. But
that's
if he goes somewhere, if he happens to be somewhere where there's like environmental,
a lot of young
hazards and
men
stuff.
went places. Yeah. I don't recall if he did.
All right.
Okay.
So we'll ask some other questions that we would ask of anyone in this situation. You'd want to know a sexual history for these, because I don't know. So now I'm having to back up, to be honest, because I don't know what this is. It's something strange and concerning, potentially neurologic. Could be you gave me a flu case and then he came back, but I wouldn't probably remember that
Would
right
Mike
away.
have just given us the flu case just to be?
He
just to
could
throw a
have.
complete.
He could have, yeah. But I don't know. So what I would do is I would
person thing to do.
back up and broaden the net. Yeah. And so the net that I would worry about would be atypical infectious things and then tox. So the other questions I would ask would be like, were you guys at a speakeasy? Were you, what's your living situation? What do you do for work? And Mike, you could short circuit if there's any of those. Like I would kind of.
So he occasionally drinks brandy only when he gets sick. He hasn't been to a speakeasy. He's asexual. He's never had sex. Has no interest in it, but that's not a part of this.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
All right. Fair enough. We went away from that then.
All right.
What would be things that could take? So it's 4 years between the time he first complains of lethargy and the time we see him that the neuro stuff starts happening with his twitching, right? So is there a toxin that could take that long to flourish,
Interesting.
incubate?
I wouldn't say commonly. There's definitely some things like heavy metals that can sit around.
Yeah,
other things.
Doesn't have, that can take
4
years.
years would take.
Mike's never going to give us a rabies case after Edgar Allan Poe.
Rabies can
exist.
take years, but it would be very unusual, right? You would have, if you have heavy metal poisoning or something, it would take a long period of time.
Yeah. And it
normally
could be
you'd have
that he
symptoms in
didn't
the
know,
interim.
But that's a good, like heavy metals. So you got to round out your exam. Maybe that might help.
Press on the
So there's
belly.
a couple things you miss. So belly's fine.
You said the
Muscles,
reflexes.
heart-
You said the rigidity.
Heart, did we
Yeah,
listen to the
lungs.
heart? Is there a murmur?
Heart is normal.
What about skin? Rashes?
No rashes. So on his neuro exam, he's got a dilated right pupil,
Okay.
minimally responsive.
Okay.
And the unusual thing, the thing that really kind of gets you unsettled is that his eyes are deviated upward when he's awake. Every time he has his eyes open, they're like buried in the top of his head.
That's
and you
no
get a
good.
little freaked out.
And he has no fever, you said.
No fever.
It's all very bad.
One pupil's bigger than the other, and he's looking straight up. That ain't good.
Well, the other weird thing is that you have associated this with really bad intracranial or inside the head problems.
Yeah.
But he's breathing normally in between. He's responding to you, although slowly. And the other unusual thing with your neuro exam is that he's got we call flat faces. So he's got an expressionless face. So that's why you kind of perceive that he's not concerned about this. And the other weird thing is whenever you move his arm will stay in the position that you left it in.
That's bizarre.
It
So
moves fairly easily, but it'll stay exactly where you left it.
well, the I don't care is a syndrome. So indifference to your own condition that can be a sign of a posterior circulation event in some cases.
But he does care, though. He just seems like he doesn't because of his
He's just got a flat
expressionless face. He tells you, like, I'm actually really worried something serious is going on.
So
and
that's
he could
different
say that.
because there are people that'll, like, for example, they'll go blind, but they won't care. And that,
But while
that can
he's
be a
saying
certain
that,
type of posterior
his
stroke.
eyes, this is
So
called the
he's-
oculogyrate crisis. His eyes are stuck up when he's talking. And he can focus on forcing them down and look at you for a moment, but then they pop right back
All
up.
right, I'm going to call a neurologist.
This is one of those things where
come to the emergency department
there's
now,
a
please.
pattern emerging in my head and I can't name it. Like, this is
It
something
sounds-
I've
it
heard
sounds
of
dope.
and I can't.
It's sounding dopaminergic to me. So there's neurotransmitters around the base of the brain that control, like, that are implicated in Parkinson's. And this is going way back and I don't remember it well, but right. I mean, those are the neurons
the
that are
flat
involved in
facies kind of
movements.
gives it away. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So
rigidity.
when those are all messed up and they're not doing well, that section of the brain that's kind of the genesis of your movement, in it, to say a very poetic way of something I don't remember well from neurology, is right. Like those neurons are not working correctly.
All right. What do you guys think? Do you have a diagnosis in mind?
Oculogyrate crisis.
That's a symptom. It's not a thing.
Parkinson's.
All right. Parkinson's.
Bam.
Yeah,
I'm
no, you're
guessing
right.
not,
He's
'cause that
slow.
would
No,
be-
he's slow. No, you can have Parkinsonian
It sounds like
syndromes.
Parkinson's on
Right.
paper, right?
Right. Like he's slow, he's lethargic, he's not speaking quickly. Yeah, it does sound like Parkinson's. 100%.
Like, I know, okay, I'm going to try to think of something different. I know that there's a bunch of weird variations of something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is like you can get after flu. It's one of these weird things that in the classic sense can cause weakness in your lower extremities that then comes like kind of up your body to your upper extremities. But that's the classic case. And there's a lot of variable types of it, like where you can get a bunch of weird stuff, but I'm completely flailing because, like I said, there's sort of a pattern. I've heard of this before, but I can't put a name to it. So
Yeah,
I'll say a very weird, that just for, I'm putting my nickel down, but I assume I'm losing it.
Yeah. So Guillain-Barré, you'd think of weakness and
Right,
really
right.
affecting the legs first.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
Right.
ascending
Kinda moves
paralysis. You said
proximally.
arms worse.
Oh.
Yep.
But I
and
mean,
it's not
the-
paralysis; it's rigidity. So it's the opposite.
Yeah, I like. No, but I like Aaron's thought process through the like dopamine issues, like dopaminergic pathways, etc., something like that. But you know, I want to consult a lot of people, but I don't have a diagnosis name for you.
Well, it's a good thing you're a neurologist. I forgot to tell you that you're a neurologist.
They're gonna
Oh,
fire
no.
me.
Yeah.
Get out my.
Right.
Can you say more about the dopamine part, where the dopamine, how that? Because I know dopamine makes you feel good. How that relates to the nerves and the rigidity and stuff.
Since I brought it up,
Aaron.
Basal
Yeah.
ganglia.
Sorry,
No, it's a great question. So like,
you don't. Have to.
so when you hear dopamine in those cases, Elba, like dopamine is a neurotransmitter, so it's
Like
a
a
chemical
dopamine hit.
that. Yeah, it's not wrong. I mean, there are definitely areas of the brain that when they get flushed with dopamine, it's sort of a reward. And so you're like, oh, it
Mhm.
feels good. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's a brain chemical that one part of the brain can use to talk to the other part of the brain. And I'm going to speak vaguely at this because this is like echoes from way back in neuroanatomy, but there's other areas in the brain where dopamine, when it communicates, it actually kind of helps you control your movements a little bit or prevents you from doing movements you don't want to do. So basal ganglia is an area deep within the brain, and I believe Parkinson's, that's kind of where your body starts removing the dopamine receptors in that area. And so what ends up happening is that you need those receptors in that part of the brain for when you like reach up and grab something, or when you're just holding still so you don't move. And then when you start taking away the dopamine receptors, it imbalances things. And so you have movements you really don't mean to do. It can cause you to have trouble coordinating things like your walks. A lot of patients with Parkinson's have difficulty walking for that reason. And it can also like kind of inhibit your facial movements. And so they get kind of a certain called Parkinsonian face and whatnot. And so what we're thinking through is we know from the other side of things that some medications that we prescribe that also are like antipsychotic medications, they tend to work by actually blocking dopamine pathways. And what happens is when you have too much of this, it can make you kind of rigid and not be able to move. So for the lack of us putting together the symptoms Mike gave us and saying like, I think it's X disease, we're basically saying we're trying to think through it. Like, okay, I think there's a dopamine issue or whatnot, but I'll be honest with you, Mike, I don't know exactly what to call this, but I'm worried about a central process. I'm worried along those lines.
The problem is like, you're probably talking this. There's a difference between how dopamine as a chemical affects your brain versus a disorder of the stuff that makes the dopamine in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it gets confusing, because Parkinson's is so bad because like it's literally affecting the part of the basal ganglia that make it, and then all the other stuff is affecting how much you have in your brain to begin with. So it's like, so that's why it's so much worse versus, folks that, I need a dopamine hit from my video game or my cigarette or whatever else. That's just
I do need the dopamine hit from the video game though.
That's, well, sure, I understand. That's different. That's like the top part of your brain that does all the thinking and experiencing and dreaming and loving and hallucinating and all that sort of stuff, like wants the dopamine that's circulating anyway, versus Parkinson's where you're like, no, this is way more fundamental. You can't even like move because you don't have enough, right? So it's
okay.
And
I like that you put loving and hallucinating next to each other in that sentence.
Well, I don't know.
I thought that was just a great sentence.
It was a good sentence.
That was a really great sentence.
Yeah. So I think that's what the difference is here. This is whatever this person has, super fundamental. So let's be real. Like in modern days, this patient, first off, they're getting admitted. They're not getting put on a ventilator right away. I'm going to get a CT scan to make sure it's not a bleed in the bottom part of the brain. They're going to get admitted, see a neurologist, get an MRI. And that's how we'd manage it now. Maybe they might need a spinal tap, but they don't have a fever. So, right, I don't think there's an infection around the brain. So like, this is why people get frustrated with emergency room doctors. Because you sound
like a lawyer, like you can't put your
because they will come to us and they're like,
so many things.
Like this person 100% needs to be here. Like, but also I know I'm not going to solve this problem. I'm not going to be the one that cracks this case. So I'm like,
and interestingly enough, this has plagued humanity for a really long time, and I'm actually surprised that I've never heard of it and then realized quickly that I had. So I think you guys are like on the right track. You've done more for the diagnosis of this disease than humanity in 500 years, just in the last 5 minutes.
You're welcome.
Understood more about it. So you ready for the diagnosis?
Yeah. You have an answer to this case?
I think 100%.
So. Yes, I do.
Nice.
Yeah. It's called Encephalitis lethargica.
Whoa.
So
I've heard of this before.
Yeah. You have.
And
I'll tell you how. So first documented, we probably first heard of this not in the book, but there's a book called Awakenings, written by Dr. Oliver Sacks in the 70s.
It was such a great movie, too.
So he wrote that book after taking care of survivors of this encephalitis lethargica epidemic. So it affected the world from 1915 to 1926, and it killed about 500,000 people, but affected millions.
Whoa.
It preceded the Spanish flu, but then, it kind of went beyond by a couple of years. So then that book that he wrote was about a specific interaction with one patient that had this, was made into a film in 1990. So Penny Marshall directed it. I think we probably have all seen it. Yeah, Robin Williams was Dr. Malcolm Sayer. So he was Oliver Sacks. And then De Niro was his patient, Leonard Lowe. So Leonard had encephalitis lethargica, and there's a couple different types that we'll talk about later. But the interesting thing that I read was that this was an epidemic. Like this was huge.
Oh God, that'd be terrifying.
Yeah. So, and this is...
It is terrifying.
After COVID, we saw some weird neurologic things maybe that we couldn't really understand.
Yeah, for sure.
And, there's been a lot of discussion about what could potentially cause this. They think it's its own specific disease that has still not been diagnosed and still exists and still happens across the globe. So it's first described by a neurologist, Konstantin von Economo.
That's a great neurology name.
Right?
Throw a von in the middle.
Economo, you want to see the primo. Yeah. And then a pathologist, Jean-René Cruchet, in 1917.
Nice alliteration.
So
nice.
They discovered that this disease that people would get attacks the brains, and it leaves some victims in a statue-like condition. So they could walk into an office and stand there and then not move, not fall over, and be like a statue.
I saw this Doctor Who episode.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably based on this. So it's thought that it's caused 1, 2, 3, 5 named pandemics in the last 500 years. So in England, that's the first documented epidemic. It was called the English sweats in 1529. I don't have data on like how many people that affected. The English sweats. That's like if you eat too much mutton.
Yeah.
You get the meat sweats. The
geez.
second was in Italy.
Oh,
now, this is a cool
God.
name. Italy in 1597. They called it malmazzucco.
Nice.
That just probably means bad, not movement. I don't know.
Mizuko. Don't know that one off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Wait, Alba. What does that mean? Hold on.
Oh,
I
Mizuko.
actually don't know. Let me see if I can spell it. How do you spell it?
Mazzuco.
Matsuko. I don't know what Matsuko means.
Can you call your mom real quick? She might know.
Yeah, I can
Oh,
text her.
oh, Alba, don't bring up the malmazzuco.
Oh, Matsuko, it looks like it's a name. So it could have been like that guy's disease.
Fair enough.
Well,
Okay.
Germany in so this one lasted 3 years, 1672 to 75. Germany, they called it Krill-Bankenkreis. Probably means something.
It means
literal.
dam. Sorry, Matsuko means dam. So it's like
bad dam.
The bad dam.
Yeah, maybe the dam because the water stops moving.
Matsuko or like the no. Oh, maybe no. It's got an N on the end. It's like you're damned. You know, you're condemned. Because Italian, and I mean the time frame and everything, but they'll still say if you get hit with the air, you can get sick from getting hit by the air. And so I wonder if it's one of those things.
That's why I don't like wind.
You got bad damned.
Don't break the wind. So Germans had a long name for it.
Yep, Kribbelhackenheit.
You said
Sweden, they called it Raffania in 1754 to 57. Then Italy gets struck again. This time they called it Nona. Maybe Nona
That's
got
way
it first
worse.
and gave it to the family. Yeah, Nona. That's 1890 to
Nona
1891.
does that mean grandmother?
Maybe.
2 N's is grandmother.
So then the most
Nona
recent
versus
epidemic,
Nona.
they think started in Romania. And then because of World War I, that's how it kind of became a global issue. So it transmitted across Europe, became an epidemic in Vienna in 1917, France and England in 1918, and then America in 1919.
And we came up with, we called it encephalitis lethargica.
We called it encephalitis lethargica.
It's actually,
Yeah.
it's kind of cool. It's a
Yeah,
it's a
right?
interesting
That's-
name for
that
it.
was
Better than
Constantine
English sweats.
Van
No offense to our
Economo.
wonderful
Yeah.
English listeners. Come on. We do better.
So that Van Economico came up with 3 categories of this disease. It was common enough to be able to subtype it, which is fairly crazy too. And you think about some of these other really weird and concerning epidemics we've had, like polio. Like you brought that up, Max, like very similar. Like you get this viral infection that causes this really weird neurologic symptoms that are devastating to the people that get it. So there's somnolent ophthalmoplegic form. So that's the most common form. So usually if you get the flu, or they thought flu or some other prodrome, usually really quickly become dazed, confused, delirious. You look like you have meningitis. You get cranial nerve palsies. Usually affects 3, 4, and 6. So your eyes are going to be, one eye is going to be dilated. They're going to be you might be looking at the wall. Your eyes are not going to line up. And these people would have this overwhelming desire to sleep. So they used to call it like the sleepy sickness, not sleeping, but sleepy.
Yeah, it's a different thing.
They would sleep for prolonged periods of time. But the really weird part was when they were awakened, they were like, I knew everything that was going on around me while I was asleep.
Whoa. Crazy.
So they called it like pseudo somnolence.
Huh.
So the mortality rate of this version is 50%.
Oof.
That's a bad
So if you
coin
get
flip.
it, oh yeah, like
bad.
you're probably half and half. You're going to die.
I saw one quick article too that said did you find out like in the spinal fluid there were antibodies or there were findings or there was inflammation?
There were.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The hyperkinetic form. So the Leonard case that I gave you had like a combination of all 3 of these, but
Well, that's why we didn't get it, Mike. You made it more complicated. See,
Yeah.
I would have, if you would have said it was like type
But-
2 encephalitis.
no, but
just
it's
kidding.
mostly the last one. But then I threw, so like
Oh yeah, I was going to say
You would
type
have
1
this
encephalitis lethargica.
chorea. So like really weird
Ooh,
movement. So
chorea.
you're like hyper dynamic, moving around a ton, but then also sleepy.
And you say CHOREA, right? Korea, not Korea like the country.
Not
Yeah.
K.
Mhm.
No. Yeah. So people would be restless, but then they get weak, and then they would be fatigued, but then they would be manic. And this is when they would get like the facial tics and hallucinations. And it kind of sounded like that kind of dopaminergic surge you get if you overtreat Parkinson's.
Yeah.
And then the amyostatic akinetic form. So it's the least common form. This is the
what
one
does
that
mean?
happens not moving.
Amyostatic akinetic, you said?
Yeah.
So wait, amyostatic sounds like you're saying A being not muscle moving.
Right.
But the static,
so they can't
so
move.
You're not static? You're not static.
I
Why
wonder
would
if
they
it,
do that with
I wonder
the
if they're
word?
describing the movement like you can move the arm, but then it stays.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Oh, okay.
So that second form, though, looks like, well, he has a good documentary, so he probably wouldn't mind. Like Michael J. Fox always, when he was on TV and such, and with his movements, he had that like those choreiform movements.
That's a good way so people can
gotcha.
know what we're describing. Yeah, it's like that.
That's that.
Like kind of rhythmic but not repeating movements.
Yeah.
Like very compulsive, like very hard to stymie them too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like what you were talking about with the dopamine communicating.
Yeah, you
with
would
the
think that
nerves.
if you had a normally functioning dopamine and acetylcholine's the other neurotransmitter, that they kind of balance each other in the basal ganglia. If you have a normal ratio, you should be able to be like, I want to move my arm. No, I don't. And you should be able to stop your movement when you're moving forward or backwards. But if you have an imbalance in those things, then you're going to be unable to control those fine motor movements, or you're going to move when you don't really want to.
Huh. This is a terrifying disease. I hate it.
Yeah. So this form, so the amyostatic akinetic, that's the one that I was kind of describing with Leonard. Like you could move his arm and it would stay. They're really slow. They almost like probably are like sloths, like really slow to move and alter their posture. The other weird part is that the masked faces. So they had really emotionless faces, and often like people thought they were locked in because they wouldn't open their eyes. They would be asleep. They wouldn't move, but they were completely awake and aware of everything that was happening around them.
This was the interesting thing around the recent pandemic, because everybody's like, they were there was a lot of dialogue and a lot of articles about how, this new viral illness would cause trouble because of the post-inflammatory complications of it, and how that was such a scary thing. And I guess from my standpoint, I'd be like, well, viruses have always done this. Like there's always been, and lots of infections have. There's always been throughout history, there's been these weird post-inflammatory things, and 100% it's a consequence of a new infection. You don't know what it's going to do. So, and some of them are neurologic.
And you're just hoping that
weird.
it doesn't do something like this.
Right.
Because didn't we have like the ADIP, like this weird demyelinating issues after COVID, like post.
You're going to have to explain what demyelinating means.
Well,
now.
the myelin gets...
The covering of the nerves. Like, so if you think of an electric wire...
That's what's called myelin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you think of electrical wires, they have the plastic on the outside of the copper. Like if you think of myelin, the myelin is the plastic on the outside of the copper of the nerves. So if you lose that covering, it doesn't conduct well. So then you get diseases like multiple sclerosis, and your nerves don't work correctly. A lot of different things will there'll be a inflammation because your immune system gets all jacked up by the original infection, and then there's a lot of consequences of that prior infection. So that's what people are.
And that's
that
what
might
you're
attack
saying.
the myelin then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of another way to think about it is when you're saying these autoimmune, etc., the way that it can work with so many of these diseases, especially viral diseases, but some bacterial diseases, certainly, you get the disease, your immune system attacks the disease. But for some reason, some people may form antibodies that were initially thought to be directed against the virus. The antibodies, that part of your immune system that is in the bloodstream, these white blood cells, are constantly wandering around looking for proteins that look like enemy or invasion proteins. By that I mean virus or bacteria particles, right? So sometimes what happens is you get the infection, those white blood cells that are looking for the proteins that were part of that infection. In some people, it seems as if those white blood cells, after the infection is gone, start seeing some of your body's proteins like they are viral proteins. So
They
if
get
that
power
protein,
hungry.
well, kind of, sort of like the same white blood cell might see your myelin, that coating on the nerve, and then start attacking it, thinking it's viral. So autoimmune, your immune system is attacking itself. That's kind of or attacking the body. So it's sort of, that's where the word comes from. But the crazy thing is these are really hard to predict. And so, you have 1 million people who come down with your run-of-the-mill influenza. a small handful of them will go on to develop something like Guillain-Barré syndrome, where the immune system that was attacking the influenza now seems to see parts of your nervous system as enemy proteins and will start inflaming them and driving all the power of the immune system against them. And so why this happens in some people and not others is not fully understood. And it's thought that this is probably underlying things like multiple sclerosis. I think I just read they're starting to find a connection between multiple sclerosis and Epstein-Barr virus, the virus that causes mono. And a lot of people get mono. It's very common, but not a lot of people get multiple sclerosis. And so it's this sort of cross problem of your body's protein or your body's immune system misrecognizing proteins after an infection. It's like the virus simplified, but it like teaches the white blood cells that parts of the human body from which they're arising are to be attacked. And it's kind of terrifying.
Yeah. I had multiple infectious disease professors who contended that everything is infection. And they'd be like, we just haven't identified it yet. Which, in point of fact, it's not a terrible hypothesis. I mean, a lot of these things do happen. And there are a lot of people that are having effects from COVID still. And it is, I think, I would validate that those people might be having things like that. But this one's crazy though. This encephalitis lethargica is very dramatic compared to other inflammatory syndromes, right?
Does it goes away and it never comes back and affects us again ever? Is that how it's going to work, Mike?
No, it looks like it keeps popping up every couple hundred years.
God bless
and
America.
We're probably good for our lifetime, but I'd say probably in 4 or 5 generations are toast.
But we don't know like the bacteria that causes it or
it doesn't sound like it.
So I guess what they did, they didn't have imaging studies. So the people that died, they did autopsies on, and in almost all of the cases, they found brain edema. They said widespread
swelling of the brain.
So swelling, brain swelling, bleeding, widespread, and then they said inflammatory lesions, but didn't get any more specific in that in the paper that I read. They found neurofibrillary tangles. So these are the original NFTs, and these are ones that you don't want.
Nice.
So they were first identified by Dr. Alzheimer, and then he gets his own disease.
Yeah, so neurofibrillary tangles are like proteins that kind of get twisted up, and then they just become deposited in nerve cells. So like when we make a diagnosis of Alzheimer's dementia, there's not like a blood test we can run. We have to like look at the evidence of the way that the memory issues came on and make a supposition, because the only way you can be sure of Alzheimer's dementia is to take a sample of the brain, put it under a microscope, and see these tangles, these neurofibrillary tangles. And we don't do that. That's very invasive, so there's not really a reason.
You can check for rabies at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to get brain tissue, you might as well look for about everything, because it's just not a tissue you can reach in and grab easily.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's interesting.
There's a couple articles that say that a common virus called enterovirus might be implicated. I don't buy that, because we get enterovirus.
Bro, you're stealing my thunder.
Oh, sorry.
Golly.
Bad Aaron. He researched.
He is getting excited, yeah.
Aaron, I only Google after they've explained.
I Google
Aaron,
during all the time. I Google during all the time.
Unknown.
Okay, yeah. I agree with that.
So it's thought to be a lot of different hypotheses throughout time. So von Economo, who was like there in it from the beginning, he thought it was probably influenza encephalitis. Now the interesting thing is that this started a couple of years before the influenza pandemic, but most likely what happened is that these cases of influenza were going undiagnosed, or like pre-pandemic levels.
Sure.
Kind of like what we may have seen with COVID. We probably saw it well before we actually knew we saw it. You say having some viral symptom, syndrome or whatever. I'm guessing for a couple months before. So there's a chance that this is happening, but they made this diagnosis years before the flu pandemic. So that's where they kind of like decoupled the connection, because they're like, well, the pandemic didn't start for years after this. This was first. So it couldn't possibly be from influenza. I heard the enterovirus thought, because there's some other enteroviruses that can cause bad encephalitis, and polio is an enterovirus.
Yeah.
The one thought, so there's been a bunch of, I guess, panels looking at this over the years. Like there was a big panel in 2004 that looked at potentially trying to find the identifying cause for this. There's another one. I think the latest one was in 2012. And their thought was everybody, again, it was like not influenza. Then, oh, maybe it could be influenza. There's a thought that influenza actually increases the permeability of the nasal mucous membranes and allows this unknown, untyped virus to enter more easily. So potentially like a super infection.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, essentially people don't know. And unfortunately, you can't go back in time and get CSF samples. You can't do MRIs. You can't figure this out after the fact. You just have to rely on these autopsies and their descriptions of what happened.
Viruses are terrifying. There's so many of them.
This was underreported, obviously. So like we have a pretty good documentation of 500,000 deaths over the course of 6 years, but it's most likely, triple, quadruple that.
That's so much. I guess millions died of the influenza pandemic. So in those times, but still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they said they thought at least 1 million diagnosed with it. But again, with the numbers don't match up because they would say a third of people would die during that acute phase of the infection. So within the first 3 weeks, a third survived without symptoms. And then a third had chronic neurologic issues. So the story, I think, about the awakenings, I think it was in the 60s. It was based in a nursing home with this guy that had this disease. And so, the doc in the movie is trying different treatment. So Aaron, like you were right, the treatment of choice was?
Dopa, right? L-Dopa?
Yeah.
So
L-Dopa.
dopamine, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
so they started giving this in the 1960s just because it was, they have a better understanding of Parkinsonism and neurotransmitters, and they're like, let's just try this to see if these people will get better. So these people would erupt, they say, quote, erupt into life. So they get their dopamine and they're awake. And they're awake and they're a little bit manic and they're moving and everything's great. And the treatment becomes less and less effective over time. And then usually within a few months, they'll be back to their state. And then it didn't matter how much dope or L-Dopa or levodopa you would give. It just wouldn't work.
Oh, wow. Really? Wow. So they get
a
last...
these people would only get a couple months back.
Oh,
damn.
God.
That's so sad.
So bad.
And then, the BBC did a documentary on this, I think back in 2004. And they said it's the biggest medical mystery of the 20th century.
See, it's very on brand that I would kind of get it right because basically that sums up my practice style. It's all based on vibes. I was like, that's a dopamine problem vibe. This is what I'm going to do with it. Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah, you nailed it. You nailed it. I was like, I didn't want to. I didn't want to give it away too soon.
Yeah, that's
essentially you figured it out. Like you would have been able to.
But then I'm like, I don't know the pathways. I don't know the exact science behind it. I'm like, nah, feels like kind of a dopamine thing.
So maybe we are neurologists now.
We might be.
I await our neurology
at
emails.
3 a.m, we are definitely
tell
neurologists.
everybody.
That was excellent.
Yeah, that's a good one. Ooh, wow, what a crazy topic.
I'll try to sleep knowing that now. That about does it. So, Alba, it's the most acclaimed medical history intern in the business. What was the most interesting thing you learned today?
Every time I have a flu now, I have one extra thing to be anxious about.
Excellent. Get your flu shot. We appreciate everyone listening, and we'd love to hear from all of you out there. If you'd like to check out our merchandise or provide feedback, we can be reached through our website, www.horrorhistorianspod.com. There you can send us messages and find links to our social media sites. We do work to respond to all those posts on those social media accounts. If you want to participate in the show, use our site or send us an email with a medical history trivia question. And if you have time, go and leave us a nice 5-star review on iTunes or whichever platform you choose. If you enjoy what we're doing, take a moment to tell somebody else about the show. We do appreciate that. And until next time, the Horror Historians are signing out. AMA. But Mike, you didn't watch Napoleon? That's a French
I
film,
didn't,
isn't it?
but I would watch that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that I don't
went and
watch
saw
French
it.
movies, but was it good?
It was definitely not a French movie. It was entertaining for what it was, as long as you're willing to leave history at the door.
Yeah.
Wow,
So,
this
anyway.
is fascinating. So yeah, okay,
But it was Joaquin Phoenix, right?
yeah.
It was
Is he
Joaquin.
Napoleon?
Joaquin.
How did you say his
Joaquin?
name?
Joaquin. It's Joaquin. Isn't it?
Joaquin.
It's
The J is
Joaquin.
silent, and the Q is
It's
not.
just Joaquin. It's
Joaquin.
not. That.
Yeah,
Joaquin?
I say Joaquin.
It's not
Like,
that
Did we
hard.
talk about all the forms? Is there another form?
Wait,
of this?
was he in the Joaquin Dead?